Empire.
Welcome to Inside the Cap. I'm your host, Joel Corey. You can find me on Twitter at Corey Joel. That is CORRYJOEL. And also read my regular CBSSports.com column, Agents Take on NFL Salary Cap and Contract Matters. This time around, we're going to take a look at how NFL players are paid in the postseason. Players get paid much differently in the playoffs than during the regular season. For most players, it's a pretty substantial pay cut in the playoffs because their actual salary has no bearing on what they're making during the postseason. Playoff money comes from a league pool instead of from NFL teams. The amounts were negotiated by the NFLPA and NFL Management Council in the CBA negotiations and can be found in the collective bargaining agreement for the wild card round. Division winners get $46,500. So that means that the Bills, Bengals, Jaguars, Buccaneers, Vikings, and the 49ers get that. If you are a team with a wild card round bye, which means you won your division but you don't play this week, you're getting $41,500. You have the week off. That's two teams, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. Under the previous CBA, before the playoffs were expanded, you had four teams that had byes and they did not get paid during the first week of the playoffs. There is basically, they may have been practicing, but they're doing it for free. Now, the other wild card teams, which didn't win a division, get the same $41,500. That would be the Ravens, the Chargers, the Dolphins, the Cowboys, the Seahawks, and the Giants. That's what you get in the wild card round. So this is what I mean by you taking a huge pay cut. Joey Bosa of the Chargers had a $21.25 million base salary. So for the 18 weeks during the regular season, he was making $1,180,556 per week during the regular season. So he's dropping down to $41,500 this week. Same amount that 7th round pick Xander Horvath is making, their fullback, who barely plays an offense and is primarily a special teams player. They're getting paid the same. Now, for Horvath, that's not really, it's comparable to what he's making during the regular season. He's got a $705,000 base salary during the season. So at $705,000, Horvath was making $39,167 per week. So he's actually getting a slight raise out of this. So for the season, if you got paid that amount, 41.5, that'd be $747,000. So for Horvath, doesn't really matter. Now, in the divisional playoff round, that'll be next week's games, you're getting $46,500. In the conference championship, it is $69,000. In the Super Bowl, the loser gets $82,000 and the winner gets $157,000. So the most you can make from one team in the playoffs, and you'd have to be a division winner that played this week, didn't make a bye, didn't have a bye, is $319,000. So one of those teams is the San Francisco 49ers. Brock Purdy has been a surprise as the last pick in the NFL draft, Mr. Irrelevant. looks like he could be their starting quarterback for the future the way he's been playing since Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt. And I know they have Trey Lance, but if San Francisco wins the Super Bowl with Brock Purdy, I don't think Trey Lance gets that job back, but that's for another day. But Brock Purdy this year, between his signing bonus and the same base salary as Xander Horvath, $705,000, $782,012. So if he made the $319,000, if San Francisco won the Super Bowl, that'd basically be a little more than 40% of his salary. So that money, and the Super Bowl ring mean more, but from a financial standpoint, that means more to him than it would for, we'll say, the other Bosa, Joey's younger brother, Nick. Because financially, Nick Bosa, who's probably going to be NFL Defensive Player of the Year, will sign a contract that if it does, that should make him the highest paid non-quarterback in league history. I suspect he'll be the first $35 million per year non-quarterback, but we're not getting into that today. That's the basic amount of how players are paid. Now, if you are on the practice squad, you still get your weekly rate on the practice squad. For most players, that is $11,500. So you would get your practice squad rate. Longtime vets have the ability to negotiate a range of a practice squad salary between $15,400 per week and $19,900 per week. So the longtime vets make that amount. Teams have the right to elevate two guys from the practice squad for postseason games. That's what happened for Eric Weddle last year. He was signed because the Rams had injuries in the secondary, so he came back and played every postseason game, all 4 postseason games, but was elevated from the practice squad each game. So he got the amount of playoff money as opposed to his practice squad play, because when you get elevated, you qualify, you're eligible for the money that you have each week as a participant in a playoff game. Now, the payment eligibility gets more complicated once you get to the conference championship round and then the Super Bowl. That first I need to say something. I'm going to go back before I get to that. That if you're on the 53-man roster, injured reserve, then you're going to get the money in the first 2 rounds. So that means a player like Damar Hamlin, although he's now on IR because of the horrific hit he took a couple weeks ago where he almost lost his life against the Bengals, he's getting paid the same amount as Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and his other teammates during the postseason. He had that split salary in his contract where when he went on IR, the lower amount would have kicked in, but the NFLPA and the NFL worked something out, so he was going to get the higher amount for the week. But he doesn't have to worry about that for the wild card round divisional playoff games, because you're on 50-man roster, injured reserve at the time of game. You're going to get the same payment as the guys who are participating. As I was saying, now we're going to move on to the conference championships and the Super Bowl. That gets more complicated. That you get the full amount if you're on the 50-man roster when the game is played and you've been on the roster for at least 3 previous games, regular season or playoffs. If you are a veteran, that means you have at least 1 year of service and you're put on IR during the regular season and you're still under contract when the game is played, you get the full amount. That's the category that Damar Hamlin falls into. If you have 4 more years of service, you're basically a vested veteran, you're put on IR during the preseason and you're still under contract during the game is played, full amount. If you are on the 50-man roster at the time the game is played and spent at least 8 games on the roster, regular season and playoff, and you're not under contract to another team in the same conference, then you're going to get the full amount. Now, for that last category, That means someone like Jeff Wilson, who was with the Niners for the first 8 games of the regular season, was traded right before the trading deadline to the Dolphins on November 1st. If the 49ers get to the conference championship, then advance to the Super Bowl, he'll be sitting on his couch making the same money as Christian McCaffrey, who was the reason he ended up being traded. He became expendable. They had Elijah Mitchell, a backlog at running backs, thought he was coming back. He would be relegated third back. Goes to Miami. Miami's in the playoffs, so he actually gets to double dip. So he's going to get money for as long as Miami's in the playoffs. And then Niners win 2 playoff games. They are going to play a third. And he gets that. He gets money as well. Same thing for Brandon Hance, offensive guard that was cut after being with the 49ers for 8 games. He plays for the Jaguars. That he gets to double dip as well. So as long as Jacksonville's in the playoffs, then he's going to be in the same position that Jeff Wilson is in. Now, the reason I know about that is when I was an agent, that you get to double dip, I had it come into play, and it applies to another category. That I used to represent this safety that played for the Bucs out of USC, David Gibson, that was drafted, I think, in 2000, late round pick. The year Tampa won the Super Bowl, he was there for early part of the season for like 4 games. Got traded to the Colts when they had an injury in the secondary. Ended up starting because Tony Dungy's first year in Indy brought someone who knew the system. So Indy made an early playoff exit, and David Gibson was rooting for the Bucs to win the Super Bowl because he was getting his Indy playoff money and also was getting Bucs money. Now, there's another category. You get a half amount, half share in these 2 rounds. So by that half share, $69,000 conference championship is the full amount, $34,500 is the half amount. Winning the Super Bowl team, half amount, $78,500 for the winner, $41,000 for the losing team. So if you were on the 53-man roster when the game is played, but it's been less than 3 previous games, regular season or playoff, then you get the half amount. First-year players put on injured reserve during the regular season, still under contract when the game is played, and signed a player contract, practice squad contract in the prior season, half share. Veterans of 1 to 3 years of service put on IR during the preseason that are still under contract when the game is played, half share. Now, if you aren't on the 53-man roster at game time and spent between 3 and 7 games on the roster, regular season or playoffs, and provided you're not under contract to another team, then you get a half share. Now, the schedule ends up screwing Rashad Felton on how much playoff money he can make if Kansas City has a deep playoff run. Now, Felton was with the Kansas City Chiefs for 8 weeks. So, is there 8 weeks? You're thinking, hey, he's getting a full playoff share. Nope. Bye week was week 8. It goes by games, not weeks. 7 games, 8 weeks, 7 games puts Rashad Felton in the half share category. Kansas City gets to the conference championship or the Super Bowl. He was traded on November 1st to the Atlanta Falcons. Falcons NFC team, Chiefs AFC team. So the scheduling gods are going to cost him money. So that's an interesting little quirk right there for Damar Hamlin. Now, there is one more category that will get a quarter share for these last 2 playoff rounds. First-year players put on injury reserve during the preseason that are still under contract when the game is played. They must also have been on a team's practice squad for at least 8 games in a prior year or received 1 or 2 game checks while on the 50-man roster or injury reserve in the prior year to qualify for the payment. Now, payments during the playoffs, by the collective bargaining agreement must be made within 15 days after the game has been played. Group of players who have the ability to make more money in the playoffs than the league bonus pool because they have individually negotiated incentives relating to the playoffs, individual playoff bonuses. Last year we saw that Odell Beckham, when he joined the Rams after being released by the Cleveland Browns, that his contract was heavy on incentives relating to his play time in the Rams' success in the playoffs. Since the Rams won the Super Bowl, he ended up making $3 million in incentives. We have some players who have bonuses in their contracts based on what happens in the playoffs. Now, the Chiefs have number one seed in the AFC. In that 10-year extension, 12 total contract years Patrick Mahomes signed in the summer of 2020, starting with the new years, 2022 through 2031. He's got $2.5 million of annual incentives. Now, 1.5 of that is predicated on him playing 50% or more of the offensive snaps in the regular season, which obviously he did, or 50% in the AFC Championship where the Chiefs win the game. Then he's going to make $1.25 million. So because it's the 50% regular season playtime, if the Chiefs win the AFC Championship game, $1.25 million for Patrick Mahomes. Now, there are a couple other Chiefs who have incentives in their contract where they're going to make money based on the Chiefs' playoff success. Now, Frank Clark took a massive pay cut to stay with the Chiefs. He was going to make $19.5 million, dropped his pay to $6.75 million, had $7 million in incentives so he could make up some of it. Now, part of those incentives are tied to his playtime success. Now, for making the playoffs, he got $1 million because his playtime had to be 60%, and the Chiefs made the playoffs. His was at 62.5, basically. He gets another $500,000 with Kansas City winning the AFC Championship game. He plays a minimum of 50% in that game, and his regular season playtime was at least 60%. So he's got the 6% part. Now, I think he had a groin injury in the final regular season game. So that gives him a couple of weeks to get in a position where he could play 50%. If he doesn't play 50% in that game, then he doesn't make the $500,000 if the Chiefs win the Super Bowl. Now, he can't make an additional $1 million. There's an additional $1 million for the Super Bowl, but he doesn't even qualify for that. His playtime going into the regular season finale was just a shade under 65%. The injury cost him a chance to get to 65% playtime, which is needed for a Chiefs Super Bowl win, provided he has at least 50% participation in that game. So Frank Clark can make another $500,000 based on what the Chiefs do in the playoffs. Now, there's another Chiefs defensive lineman who also has some incentive heartbreak, and that is Carlos Dunlap. That he's got an incentive where it's called, in his contract, 22 postseason playtime and team performance incentive. So he's got to participate in 50% or more of the defensive plays during the regular season and 25% or more of the defensive plays in the Super Bowl, and the Chiefs win. That's $1 million. Now, this is where it gets brutal for him. Playtime during the regular season, 49.83%. So you might be thinking, well, if you have 49.83%, you round up, that's 50%. Well, it specifically says in this clause in his contract, official statistics are binding on playtime percentages above. playtime amounts will not be rounded up, i.e., player will not be eligible for an incentive if participates in 49.99% of the snaps in the regular season specified above. So that takes care of this 49.83%. It says 49.9 does not qualify. So that means no chance at the $1 million. Now, there's another Chief who's in a position to earn significant money in the playoffs, and that's Juju Smith-Schuster. And he ended up signing a one-year prove-it deal with the Chiefs, which had $10.75 million in incentives. Now, he's earned significant incentives already. He's earned 4.5 based on his performance and playtime. He had one where he gets $1.5 million for Kansas City making the playoffs, and his playtime being 65%. Well, he cut it close, but his playtime was 66.58%. So if Kansas City plays, if he plays at least 50% on offense in an AFC Championship game, so as long as he's healthy, he will. An AFC Championship game win, I should say, and has at least 65 catches for 900 yards. He's over both of those amounts. Then Juju's getting $1 million. Now, if he same criteria, and it happens in the Super Bowl, he plays 50% in the Super Bowl, he gets another $1 million. So Juju's already made 4-5 in incentives. He can get to 6-5, make $2 million in the playoffs, as long as he stays healthy. And Kansas City gets to the Super Bowl. Juju's going to make another $2 million. Now, there are a couple of quarterbacks who have bonuses riding on how far on the Super Bowl. And that's Dak Prescott and Kirk Cousins. Now, the 4-year, $106 million contract Prescott signed in March 2021 has a $1 million incentive each year for the Cowboys winning the Super Bowl, provided Prescott takes at least 50% of the offensive snaps. Now, Dak Prescott that showed up in the regular season finale against the Commanders, that's probably the worst regular season game I've ever seen Dak Prescott play. That Dak Prescott will put the Cowboys in a position to lose to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and have an early playoff exit and won't be playing in week 2. If the Dallas Cowboys collected against Minnesota Vikings a few weeks ago, that Dallas Cowboys team could get to the Super Bowl. Now, speaking of the Minnesota Vikings, I don't think I have ever seen an NFL team, well, actually, it's never happened, that just ekes out so many close games in a row. I think they're 11-0 in one-score games. They're 13-4. They've got a negative 3-point differential. How do you win 76.5% of your games and get outscored 427 to 424 on the season? I don't have a lot of confidence in this Minnesota Vikings team getting to the Super Bowl, but in the event that they do, it could be profitable for Kirk Cousins if they win. His regular season play time had to be 75%. Done. Has to play 70% in the Super Bowl, and if they win, that's $1 million. If he's Super Bowl MVP, that is another $1 million. Now, sticking with quarterbacks, Jimmy Garoppolo, no one expected him to be a 49er this year. The assumption or presumption was he was going to get traded to pave the way for Trey Lance to be the starter. Well, injuring his shoulder in the playoffs, I believe, against Cowboys last year, turned out he needed to have right shoulder surgery, his throwing shoulder. Trade market disappeared. He was put in purgatory during training camp. Then, surprisingly, agreed to take a huge pay cut. Was going to make $25 million during the season, dropped it down to $7 million with another $8.45 million in incentives. Now, he has money riding on the playoffs, but odds are he's not going to get it. Well, first, he got $500,000 for making the playoffs, where his regular season playtime was 50% or above. So we got that. Now, Garoppolo broke his foot week 13, left foot against the Dolphins in week 13. Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy. Word is, at least reports are, that even if Garoppolo can come back and it's trending in that direction, they're not taking Purdy out of the lineup. So that means Jimmy Garoppolo, because his play time was 50% above in the regular season, and the 49ers are in the NFC Championship, he's going to get some money. That's going to be $500,000. Another $500 for win. Now, doing that in a Super Bowl win and playing at least 50% is worth another $1 million. Now, I believe that's correct on Garoppolo. I'm going to double check that, but we're going to move on to a couple other guys first before I give a definitive answer on Garoppolo. So I wrote it down, but I'm going to double check that to make sure I got Garoppolo's incentives right. Now, we had one guy who famously had money riding on making the playoffs in the regular season finale, and that was Geno Smith, another quarterback. Geno Smith had an incentive, had playtime incentives where they maxed out at $1 million based on his playtime. He didn't miss a snap during the regular season, so he already was at $1 million, and they were going to double to $2 million if they made the Seahawks made the playoffs. So they took care of their end of the bargain by winning against the Rams in the regular season finale. Although the officiating has been criticized, and maybe they shouldn't have been in that position because some calls that were made and some that weren't made. So heading into Sunday night, the Green Bay Packers controlled their own destiny, playoff destiny. Green Bay beats Detroit, then Seattle doesn't make the playoffs. Geno Smith should send a huge thank you card to the Lions for knocking off the Packers and getting him to the playoffs. So that's how he got that money. Now, back to Garoppolo for a minute. That qualifies for the conference championship game, participates in 50% or more. Always got to play 50% or more during the conference championship game. So no, Garoppolo, I stand corrected. I was wrong. Garoppolo's not getting the money in the conference championship game because if Brock Purdy's still on the field, he's not getting $500,000 or the $500,000 more for the win. He'd need Brock Purdy to get injured. He'd have to come in and play more than 50% or more, and for him to even get that money for the playoffs. So it's just based on what he does in the playoffs. Garoppolo could be out $2 million if they win the Super Bowl because he's got to participate in 50% or more of the plays in the Super Bowl. And if they get there, for another $1 million. So Jimmy Garoppolo, who can't stay healthy, and that's the reason why they went out and got Trey Lance, because he was always hurt, perpetually injured, then gets hurt again, opens the door for Brock Purdy. He's going to cost himself $2 million because the way it's trending right now, even if he comes back, they're not going to make the quarterback switch. Now, there's some guys who were signed late in the season that have interesting incentives. One is T.Y. Hilton, that the Cowboys were flirting with Odell Beckham Jr., ended up signing T.Y. Hilton instead. And Dallas has to right the ship. If he plays 30% in any playoff game that they win, so if he plays 30% in each playoff in the wild card round, and Dallas can beat Tampa, that's $100,000. 30% in the next round in a win, $150,000. 30% in the conference championship game in a win, $200,000. 30% or more in the Super Bowl in a win, that's $250,000. So, T.Y. Hilton can make another $750,000 based on Dallas's playoff success. He should get $100,000 because this is not a very good Tampa team. Tom Brady's never lost in his career to the Dallas Cowboys, so that's going against Dallas. Dallas hasn't won a road playoff game in 30 years. Troy Aikman was a quarterback then, strike two. But on paper, Dallas should win. They've lost the last two times they played Tampa, but T.Y. Hilton's in a position to earn more money. The Philadelphia Eagles signed 2 interior defensive linemen, basically right, I think the same day, if not the same day, the same week, Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph, to provide more depth along a deep defensive line. Now, they both have incentives in their contract, which will playoffs, which max out at $500,000. There are 2 ways to earn it, and they're both there the first way. That if their cumulative play time over the last 8 games, and that's when they signed, was 30% or more, both of them hit that. They had 497 defensive snaps over the last 8 games. Suh was in on 176 of them. That's 35.4%. Linval Joseph, 189 snaps. That's 38%. So they hit the 30% mark they needed to. Now, they have to be on the 53-man roster for each playoff game, but if they're on a 53-man roster, it's $125,000 per win. No, actually, I take that back. They can only max out at $375 because the way the incentive was worded, it didn't have a stipulation they get money if there's a bye, that they would get $125 for the wild card round if they hit the 30%. It didn't say that, so there was only 3 playoff games for the Eagles. So the most they can get is $375 because of the way this thing is worded. Maybe the Eagles will pay them the $125 anyway. I don't know. But for the divisional playoff round, NFC Championship game, and Super Bowl, if the Eagles get there and these 2 guys are on the 50-man roster for those games in the wins, and they win, that's $125,000 each. They max out at $375. If they hadn't played the 30% in the regular season, if they played 30% in the playoffs in a win, they'd still get the money, but they've already qualified the first way. So we've gone over how playoff money works league-wide, that you're not playing financially unless you're a late-round pick like Brock Purdy, because playoff money, if San Francisco wins the Super Bowl, is a little more than 40% of what he's making between his signing bonus and 2022 base salary. But for the bigger picture, if San Francisco wins the Super Bowl, he's their quarterback of the future. Huge pay cut for most players, given the way playoff money works. $319,000 is the most you can make for one individual team, but you had to be a division winner that was not getting a bye. So for Kansas City and Philadelphia, the most either one of those teams players could make is $314,000. Brandon Hance, backup guard, midseason acquisition, was claimed off waivers when the 49ers released him. He's in a position to make more money than anybody else because he can double dip. Same, Jeff Wilson's in a position as well, provided Miami upsets Buffalo, which point the double-digit underdog. He'll get to double dip, but they could make more than they'll make more than $319,000 if the 49ers win the Super Bowl, because they are making playoff money from their own team. Now, you got players that have individual playoff bonuses as well, and we just went over those. That's how players make money in the postseason. Now, that's going to be it for this week's Inside the Cap. Don't forget, you can find me on Twitter. That's Corey Joel. That's CORYJOEL. And you can read my regular CBSSports.com column, Agent's Take, on NFL salary cap and contract matters. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you back here next time.